That's check to 200-200.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
Yes!
This is the Ross Kaminsky Show.
You're a great American.
He's a great guy.
Now, Ross Kaminsky on Denver's talk station, 630 KHAL.
Hey, good morning. It's Monday already. Where did that weekend go? Well, for me, part of it went to, to Beaver Creek, the unlikely location for the Steamboat Institute's annual Freedom Conference. But it was a tremendous event. I was out there Friday and Saturday. Thanks so much to the excellent Leland Conway for filling in for me on Friday. It was fun to call into my own show as a guest. I called in from Beaver Creek a couple of times. It was just a tremendous event. And I'll just tell you a little bit about it. But in the next couple of days, when they start putting up links to the videos of the folks who spoke, I'll make sure to get those to you so you can hear some of the stuff that I heard that was... It was thought-provoking. In some cases, it was inspiring. And some of the speakers included Kim Strassel from the Wall Street Journal, Art Laffer, and Dr. Scott Atlas. You remember Scott Atlas has been on the show, but since then, he has become a key advisor to President Trump on coronavirus because he's actually paying attention to the data and not just the hype. Cory Gardner was there. I got to say hi to Cory. Oh, this is a fun thing. Shannon, you got to listen to this. So we did an interview by Zoom of Rick Grenell. So most of you will know Rick Grenell was our ambassador to Germany, and then for several months, he was acting director of national intelligence, during which time he declassified some documents relating to FISA abuse and the Democrats' Russia collusion scam. And he was... You know, the media loved to hate him at that time, but it was a tremendous interview, really interesting guy, and I'm going to try to get him on the show myself. First openly gay member of any president's cabinet ever, which is interesting. And I'm not going to go more into all this, the main part of the substance, but I was the interviewer. And so Shannon, at the end of the interview with Rick Grenell, first of all, I asked him sock, shoe, and he, he had the right answer there, sock, shoe, shoe. But then, since we were doing this by Zoom, and I knew he was coming to us from California, and sort of behind him, you could see what looked like a nice sunny day and maybe even a hint of a palm tree or something. You'll appreciate this, Shannon, because I don't think anybody else would have asked him this question. Not that anybody else would have asked him sock, shoe. Anyway, but I asked him, are you wearing shoes? And he said no. He said no. And I said, I didn't think so. You looked very, very comfortable during the conversation today. So
we've had a coworker here describe it as business mullet.
Party on the bottom, all business on the top.
Bingo.
Oh, that's really good. There was a young guy from Venezuela who spoke. His name was Jorge Galicia. And he was a political activist there, not in a rioting, overthrowing, gun-toting kind of way, but just out protesting and talking about freedom and rights and whatever. He did that with a friend of his. He told a story about how his friend was taken in the middle of the night by the, national security kind of people and thrown in jail. And he was actually texting with his friend. And the friend says, "There's someone at my door." And then he didn't hear from him again for a few years. And the guy was eventually let out of prison after, a few years of abuse. Anyway, there were plenty of other very interesting speakers. Charlie Kirk was there, actually, and gave an interesting talk. I'm going to try to get Charlie Kirk on the show. I'll just throw out to you one thing to think about right now before I move on with the rest of today's many, many topics. I didn't realize Charlie Kirk didn't go to college. And I guess he just, he taught himself so much stuff, I think, beyond what most kids would probably be capable of doing. But he did it, pretty impressive. And it's given him a certain bias as far as college becoming unnecessary. But then you add on top of that what is definitely happening in colleges around America, which is the absolute brainwashing of our young people into believing things that are not just, in my opinion, philosophically wrong, but believing all kinds of things that are just factually wrong. The kind of stuff that causes people to riot in the streets and look to overthrow the government or, quote unquote, tear down the system. And, you know, he made one interesting point. Why are college kids, when it comes to what they believe, so much worse than high school kids? And the answer is that high school kids still have a decent amount of contact with their parents and still live in a world where they're watching people do a job and having a conversation about political events, whereas in college, they are utterly disconnected from the real world. They're not around any adults except for radical professors who live in their ivory towers and aren't really connected to the real world either. Not in every major, like probably a lot of the physics professors and the engineers are relatively connected to the part of the real world that they need to be connected to, right? It's hard to be a good engineer if you live only in the world of, gosh, things should work this way, even though they don't, and then try to, base your next engineering project on, the idea that, I don't know, people should be able to travel faster than the speed of light, and I'm just going to assume they can. But the other thing that Charlie Kirk said that really kind of got me to thinking, and it's not exactly that I never heard the idea before, but I've never heard it put as well as he put it. In effect, what Charlie said was, many or most people in America today, especially people like those in the room he was speaking to, which tend to be, frankly, upper middle class or even richer than that, mostly white people. I mean, you're talking about a pro-liberty conference in Beaver Creek that started on a work day. All right, so most people there were older than I was, although there were a decent number of younger people, but 80% older than I was. So with keeping that in mind, he said, look, the default is that your kid will go to college, but in some situations you'll have the conversation with the kid. The kid just doesn't seem a great fit for college. Either not ready right now or maybe never ready. Maybe your kid is better suited to technical school and learn how to do something with his or her hands and get out there in the world maybe 3 years earlier with no debt and get out there and make a productive living. But in any case, you start the conversation off with the default position that you're going to college and then have a conversation about, well, why in this case that is maybe not the right idea. And you let the kid explain it to you. If you're, let's say, still leaning toward college, you let the kid explain to you why the kid really shouldn't go to college. What Charlie said was, don't start with that as the default. Colleges, in his view, are, in most cases, harmful to children these days. And I'm not saying I agree with all of this, but it's definitely thought-provoking. Colleges are harmful to kids, not in every way, but in enough ways that the harm can easily outweigh the good. And so he said, make your default position that your kid shouldn't go to college. And if your kid wants to go to college, say, okay, convince me. Sit down, have a conversation, and let your kid explain to you why it's worth spending, depending on what college you go to, and assuming you don't have scholarships, why it's worth spending anywhere from $100,000 to $300,000 to go get a degree. I think it's, again, like I say, it didn't convince me yet, but it's a thought-provoking idea. I am already convinced that college can be quite harmful unless your kid is very well intellectually immunized going in, that they are not going to be convinced by the rabid propaganda. I mean, I was subjected to lots of left-wing propaganda when I was in college, and it's much worse now. Much, much worse now. Anyway, I'm going to try to get some of these folks on the show to talk about some of the things that they talked about. Oh, Heather McDonald, the Friday night dinner. Oh, my gosh. I'll tell you more about her later. She was really, really intense. Anyway, great event. I hope some of you can make it next year, perhaps. I'll give you a little more warning next year about the event, but I had a wonderful time Friday, Saturday. Hope you all had a great weekend. Yesterday for me was taken up pretty much with just getting stuff done around the house and getting things out of storage and things like that. There was some sad news in the past several days. Actor Chadwick Boseman, the star of Black Panther, died of colon cancer at the age of 43. He somehow, it's kind of remarkable in these days of paparazzi everywhere in Hollywood, was able to keep the diagnosis and the illness secret. Yes, he was diagnosed with it about 4 years ago. He was able to keep it secret, and I guess he had cancer while they were making the movie Black Panther. He also starred in the movie 42 about Jackie Robinson. He was in lots and lots of movies. Of course, a whole bunch of movies with the Black Panther character. Some of the Avengers kinds of movies. But Chadwick Boseman passed away at the age of 43. I didn't know the dude well, but he sure seemed likable. I knew him just from the movies, and I never read a lot about him. Saw him on Saturday Night Live. He was really funny on Saturday Night Live. Maybe we can find that thing, Shannon, with him and as when he's on the like Black Jeopardy. Really, really funny. I did see. I'm not much into the celebrity gossip thing, right? But I did see a story 2 days ago that was also kind of interesting. He got married not long before he died, a few months before he died, to a woman named Taylor Simone Ledward. They had been dating for a long time. They got engaged about a year ago, and I guess they got married a few months ago, when probably they both knew what was likely to happen. But anyway, I guess that was the way they wanted it to go. Not that they wanted him to die, I mean, but that they wanted to be married and have that together, even though they knew what might be coming his way. So Chadwick Boseman, rest in peace. And I'll tell you what, I really like the idea of a big Hollywood star who, as far as I know, never really just kind of made it all about him and didn't get out there in the world and tell everyone else how to live. And, I like that the dude was private. These days especially, I guess I wish more Hollywood stars were more private, All right, I want to just also talk briefly about some of the stuff going on out there in the world, and all these riots, and a few protests, a lot of riots, violence, people getting shot. This is a mess, and nobody really knows how to talk about it. Not very many people are doing a good job talking about it, and certainly not very many people who we most need to do a good job are talking about it in a way that anybody other than their own sort of base wants to hear about it. Now, for the record, and I've said this repeatedly, there's not much the federal government can or even should do when it comes to police issues at the state and local level. From the founding of our nation, the framers knew that it was very important that the federal government not have strong police powers. That we are a nation of, well, to coin a phrase, United States. And that you look at the 9th and 10th Amendments, and they make it very clear, which should have been clear already, that the federal government is supposed to be one of very limited powers. And even though we don't live in that world right now with a federal government with limited powers, and it's part of the reason for us to stick with that mindset and to understand there's a reason for all this. So a lot of people trying to blame President Trump for the stuff that's going on in the streets. It's not right. That said, Trump could talk about it a little better. Just tweeting out law and order with, all caps with exclamation points, probably not that helpful, but it's also, it's political and Trump is talking to his base primarily. But the other side, of course, I don't know if you happened to see any of the press conference yesterday afternoon with the mayor of Portland, and I'm not going to play any of the audio of it for you, but it was really disgusting. And basically, the mayor of Portland, a guy who's running a city in a state where the Democratic mayor of that state also have completely caved in to early on to protesters, just fine. I'm good with protests. It's part of the American tradition. But they completely caved into the rioters. And just like the lessons that I guess they didn't learn from Minneapolis, they pulled police back, and we saw what happened in Seattle as well. All these places, Democrat-run cities in Democrat-run states. And this guy came out yesterday with this press conference, a little bit of which was about the violence that's been happening in Portland, but most of which was just this verbal assault on President Trump, as if President Trump is creating all the looting and rioting. We've seen a couple of places where there have been sort of counter protests, not riots and not looting, simply counter protests of, Trump supporters getting in vehicles, doing sort of a vehicle parade down the road with American flags on their vehicles. I think somebody took a shot at one of those convoys a couple days ago. Apparently no one got hurt, but someone's tire got shot out. And all that guy could do was complain about President Trump. Part of the problem, and I think this may be reflected in a way in some of the polling coming out of the conventions, is that people aren't listening right now to anybody who isn't already in their bubble. And that's too bad. It's not going to help us at all. We'll be right back.
This is Denver's Talk Station with Ross Kaminsky now. Tom Martino at 10, 630 KHOW, Denver. Now, Impact Traffic.